Hello and welcome to a additional broadcast of the Hoosier football tailgate here on the Hoosier.com this evening, as the House settlement has finally been signed, sealed, and delivered. And we're going to get into that in more detail here in a moment. Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette is going to join me as we go over this settlement in a little bit more detail on what it will impacts it will have on Indiana more specifically, as well as the rest of college athletics, as it will most than likely change a lot of things when it comes to college athletics from now and until the future with this settlement and how it's all been rolled out here over the last 48 hours. But updating some recruiting news from today, the Indiana Hoosiers racked up their 11th commitment on the year thus far, and three-star tight end PJ McFarland from Lakota East High School over in Ohio announced that he is committing to the Indiana Hoosiers for his college athletic career. A big pickup at tight end for them. I will have my breakdown of PJ tomorrow. Look for that on the Hoosier.com. And just a friendly reminder, get over to the Hoosier.com, pick up your $1 for the first month, and then 50% off for the rest of the year. You get access to the Hoosier.com, as well as all the premier services there. And then, of course, on3.com for much more coverage on college athletics on a broader scale, which will be vitally important to keep up on all things as we head into a new era of college athletics here in this 2025 year. But no question, big pickup for Indiana today, as they had some nice visits over the weekend. A number one defensive lineman from the 2027 class, a 4-star, I believe, had a nice visit this past weekend, and it's going to take on further meaning when this all comes to fruition, when you think of the new settlement going into effect July 1, and a lot of crazy turnaround here in the last 24 hours, as well as what's going to happen here in the next 20 to 25 days or so as we head in towards that 1st of July of it taking effect. So as always, stay tuned not only here to the Hoosier Tailgate, but as well as the Hoosier.com and all this, and you get a chance to see all that. Second thing, the Manning passing camps, Fernando's been invited to that. That's a pretty prestigious invitation for him and that young man to get a chance to go down there to rub elbows with the elite quarterbacks in the NCAA, but also with Peyton and his brother, as that's a very prestigious quarterback camp that they have every year. And him being invited to that is a very blessed invitation to get as a college quarterback, as they get to be around some of the elite players in the country for that camp. And then Mendoza is listed as a quarterback to know for the 2026 draft. Again, that's not something we hope can happen for him, but being that he has 2 years left in college, you like for him to stay a couple of years. But if he has a great year, there's no telling that he may find his way up the pecking board of the NCAA settlement as it heads into this new era in 2025 and beyond. But again, a very fluid week upcoming here for the Indiana Hoosiers. You've got more camps, the one-day camps coming up this week with some top-notch recruits in and out. And then, of course, at some of the off-campus sites that they'll have going as well. And again, some of these prestigious things that will happen for some of these kids over the last few weeks of the summer here, as it pertains to things of like Mendoza being invited to the Manning camps as we head into this month of June And I hope this Sunday afternoon has greeted you well. One thing I do want to pass along, our affiliation with BetUS. And BetUS is one of the premier betting sites that you can join right now. Use the coupon code Tailgate and get up to 125% on your first cash deposit with BetUS. Right now with the NBA playoffs, you got the Pacers rolling hot, looking to go up 2-0 on Oklahoma City, as well as the NHL Stanley Cup and Major League Baseball. You've got WNBA basketball in full swing. When you name the sport, they have the line for it and everything else, but we're just appreciative of them being a part of the Hoosier football tailgate here on thehoosier.com. Again, if you can get over there, use tailgate as the coupon code and get up to 125% on your first cash deposit. Also remember to like and comment on the YouTube page, thehoosier.com. Follow me on Twitter as well, and any of your podcasting choices, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcast. At Spotify, if you could give us a rating and maybe a few words of a review, it's greatly appreciated. In this day of algorithms and things of that nature, it does have a impact on things of that we have here at thehoosier.com as well. But remember to hit that notification bell via YouTube to be notified when you're getting a Hoosier tailgate broadcast, as we will by all means try to alert you as quickly and as humanly possible as can as we get things rolling here. I'm just waiting here to arrive with Dylan Sinn from the Journal Gazette. Again, if you have any comments as we go through this evening, by all means, please feel free to drop a question into the chat box as well, and we can get you an answer. We will, and whether it's pertaining to the settlement in general, whether it's something else as it pertains to the Indiana Hoosiers, we'll try to get you as best informed as we possibly can this evening. But again, I wanted to get this out. I didn't want to wait till Thursday, as I felt the news cycle by then would have changed on all of this. I do think it'll change, over the next couple of days. But with this House settlement, the way things are going and changing, we've talked about it so much and how it's going to impact the college scene. I think now is a realistic time to really hone in on what it all means, and it's going to affect the college landscape greatly. It could impact some of these P4 schools in a negative way. I've already alluded to Iowa State and their dilemma. Not all schools will live up to that $20 million a year cap, I guess you could say, in that regard. But we'll find out. I'm going to get Dylan in here, and we can kind of get going. And let me see if I can get him in here as soon as I see it. There you go. There he is, bright and bushy tail. Dylan, I appreciate you joining me, my man. How are you doing this Sunday evening?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited.
Well, my man, I think I was just explaining about questions and answers in this thing tonight. But, the biggest thing with this new finally settled House versus the NCAA settlement, I didn't necessarily want to wait to Thursday because I felt the news cycle have kind of evolved on this, because this is a major change in college athletics. The NCAA, as you have known it, I have known it, I have coached in it for 28 years, is no longer in existence based upon this final settlement that has been issued. And it's going to change year in, year out, because not all P4 schools are going to go up to this $20 million a year call it a salary cap, I guess, if you want to. There are some P4 schools like Iowa State, unless they change some things in their board of trustees, they'll not be able to continue much beyond the second year because it will eat up all the reserves in their athletic department. So, I mean, those are the stories that are out there underlining all of this. Right now, everybody's like, okay, this is great. We're going to get 20 million. We're going to get into some of that tonight, as well as how this may play out for a college quarterback. But the reality of it is, it's going to have a negative impact on a lot of Division I institutions.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the reason that it's actually not the worst thing in the world that it took so long for this to get settled, right? Like we were talking about this as early as May of last year that the settlement was kind of coming. And it's not the worst thing in the world that it took this long because that it allows schools to kind of at least prepare a little bit for what's coming. Because you now have, as you said, for the top schools, the ones that plan on paying it, you have a $20 million hole in your budget that you need to fill, right? Obviously, some of that is going to come from donors, these donors that have been giving to the NIL collectives. A lot of them are now going to be giving that money to the schools instead. So some of it will come from there. But we'd already been seeing donor fatigue with some of these collectives. Like who wants to keep giving $1 million or something a year if your team is going to go 8-4, right? But that's what it takes to go 8-4, and it takes even more than that to go 12-0, right? So it's one of those things where how much you're going to be able to get out of this money from donors, and how much is it you're going to have to cut costs elsewhere. I think a lot of it is a lot of schools are looking at cost cutting elsewhere. That's why we're seeing some schools dropping teams. I think we're going to continue to see that. Olympic sports are unfortunately in big trouble in a lot of places. And I think you're going to be in big trouble in a lot of places because a lot of this money is going to have to go to football and men's basketball, and to a lesser extent women's basketball, because those are the ones that make the money, and so that's where the money has to go, right? And so I don't think we haven't seen a flood of schools canceling sports yet, but it's been a little bit of a trickle, and I think we'll probably see some more, and that's unfortunate. But that is the new reality that we are living in. I think we're probably going to see fewer of these lavish facilities built over the next couple of years here, because that money is going to go to the players as well. There are probably going to be some teams that are going to hold on to coaches for a while longer rather than pay a buyout, right? And you might get coaches who come in at lower salaries and assistant coach salaries, especially because you're going to need some of that money to pay the players. So there is a $20 million hole for the schools at the top of this. There is a $20 million hole in your budget. And you, the athletic director of that school, and everyone that works in the athletic department are going to have to get creative on how to fill that.
Yeah, we saw Scott Dolson already kind of do that over the last year or so with the number of changes within the athletic department as a whole, not filling spots, some retirements, things of that nature with everything as well. And you're correct in saying that I don't think we'll see a lot of change in 25 when it pertains to the number of sports somebody offers or anything like that, because I think they're all going to want to see how this plays out. No sense of making a rush unjust decision until you really get the bearings of what it all is going to entail. But I do believe that the non-revenue sports at a lot of these schools are going to be in trouble within the next, 2 to 5 years when it's all said and done. I just don't see a path where they can continue to offer a broad base and then have to pay this $20 million per year. And we're not even talking about the backlog of payments that are going to go back to 2016. And my son is going to be a benefactor of that. He's already gotten a couple letters of expected valuations on what it could entail money-wise. And I tell you this right now, I was shocked. in that regard. So there's a lot of things to this other than just the people that go on the field each and every week. And what I'm going to do here, I've kind of got like a PowerPoint for us. I'm going to bring you up here as well as soon as I can. And we can kind of hit this on a broader spectrum as we go through. Because I think in some respects, there's so much with this, Dylan, that the NCAA and everything with it, you know, kind of how it goes and all this. But as we know, the settlement came down on the 6th, which was Friday, I think. Nothing like news drops on Friday afternoons late or Saturdays.
It was like 7:00 at night on Friday. It was
something. Yeah, it was crazy. $2.8 billion settled, and it resolves all the lawsuits that were involved in all this. And then that's the retroactively impacts what I said there from 2016 up to 2024 and the next 10 years when it comes to these payments and such. But it's crazy. 2.8 million in back pay. And that's what I was saying. There's been this website out there that basically, if you were a former athlete in that time period, you submitted all your information, and then they would give you back a letter of whether you accept this or not type of deal. But the 2.8 billion in itself is just crazy to think of. What's your thoughts on the 2.8 billion in back pay?
Yeah, I mean, that was the number that came out a while ago. It was a year and a half ago at this point that it was going to be about 2.8 billion. And as it says here on the screen, 14,000 athletes are getting payouts. So there are going to be some sizable payouts here, but there are going to be a lot of athletes who are going to get checks for like a couple $100s. And just, it's kind of like it is a class action settlement in that way, where it's like, not everyone is going to get rich off of this, but there are going to be some people who just get a little bit of cash floated their way for their efforts back in the day is kind of what it is, right? And for their market value, or not even really their market value, but what the court determined, or these litigants came together to determine would have been their market value at the time. So it's really interesting that you talked about your son getting a letter and being like, you're going to get a little bit of cash here. It's probably going to be a lot of stories like that. There's not going to be a ton of people to get rich from this. It's going to be a lot of people who get checks for a couple $100 saying, hey, acknowledging that you probably deserve to make some money back then.
Yeah. When you think about it, you know, I think they said like I said, there are 14,000 receiving payouts, and it begins immediately. And July 1st is the new implementation for this year of this set of players and recruits and things like that. It's just amazing. Like I told you, when Isaac, that's my son, had sent me a text and shared with me what the estimates for him were, I was just like, this is crazy. I mean, I can just only imagine for what it would be like if a guy was, a 3-year starter and things like that, because, you know, some of this is the EA sports stuff, I think, as well, maybe involved in this, but it's just crazy how much this all entailed going on. But this is the thing where we get into the meat of it. Like I said, starts July 1st. Now it says schools can pay up to, that's the key component here, up to $20.5 million per year. Now, this is where the concern comes, in my opinion, I'll get yours on this, is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because it's not going to be a level playing field and it pertains to this amount of money. What the Big Ten does and the SEC does might be drastically different what the Big 12 and the ACC just choose to do, because it's not a, definite 20 million a year. You either got to, determine what that's going to be, but the reality of it is not all P4 schools are going to be the same. Thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why it matters that the Big Ten and the SEC have these huge television contracts, right? Like the Big Ten, by the end of their current contract, it's going to be close to $100 million a year per school from TV revenue alone, right? Like that's why it's going to certainly help fill this gap here. Now, what I will say is that to some extent, this is actually going to be a little bit of a decrease for some of these programs, right? Like at the
Mm-hmm.
very, very top of college football. Like we last year, I think it was Texas spent $22 million on its football roster last year. Ohio State spent 20. Right now,
Right.
that's the
Mm-hmm.
very, very high end. Like not a lot of schools were spending that much, but that is the very high end. And so it was climbing every year, right? And Kurt Signetti made news earlier this summer where he said there's going to be a $40 million roster somewhere, right? And that's not going to be the case now because you are capped at 20.5 million this year for the entire athletic department. This is not just football. This is the entire athletic department is capped at 20.5 million. And of course, we'll get into going forward how you're able to kind of go above that with the NIL payments, the old
Mm-hmm.
school, old fashioned NIL payments. That is also part of this that we'll get into. But this is going to be a decrease for some of these schools. They're going to have to decide, okay, if we're Ohio State and we just spent $20 million on our roster last year, okay, maybe we're going to spend 16, 17 this year, and then how much are we going to spend on men's basketball and women's basketball and whatever else that we want to spend money on because we care about other sports as well, because Ohio State fields however many sports, right? So it's some of the schools at the very, very top of the sport, it's going to be a come down. For everyone else, this is probably aspirational, but for most of FBS football, this 20.5 million is aspirational at best.
Well, look at it this way. We know that football is probably going to garner 75 to 80% of that $20.5 million a year, or whatever that amount is per the school that you are at. This is the question that I think has to be asked of schools like Indiana. Are they going to go up to 20.5 million a year? Or are they going to come up with an a different level? What is that level? Because, if the Ohio States and all of these others are going to spend 20.5 million a year and Ohio State gives 75, 80% to football, there's going to be a differential in the amount that each school is going to have. And that is not a level playing field per se. Unless you've got some alternative way of doing it with the NIL. I don't know. But you can see where I'm going with the discrepancy. This could create quite instantly in conference that if the upper echelon's paying more than the middle to the lower echelon, there's going to be a grave difference between what is the top of the Big Ten or SEC and the bottom of the Big Ten and SEC potentially. Now, they get a cap increase every year, 4%. That goes back to your television rights and things of that nature. But again, I think we know where we can go. It's just a matter of what schools in the Big Ten will go. And that's what we don't know. Is it just going to be an overall agreement with the Big Ten? We're at 20.5, or is it going to be left up to the schools individually on where that's at? And that's going to be the huge question to ask or have answered as we go into it. Here's a good one. We talked about the 75 per 80%. Quarterbacks and top players will be your biggest earners. Shocking. That's going to be interesting. I've got a thing after this we'll get into with a kind of a presentational aspect of this, but I've heard already rumors that top quarterbacks are going to be making upwards of 2 to 3 million a year potentially. What's your thoughts, or have you heard anything different in that avenue?
Well, I mean, I think the number that we heard for Carson Beck, the Miami quarterback who transferred from Georgia, I think the number we heard was 4 million for this year.
Yeah.
Now that might change if with the cap now per se. But I mean, Michigan just signed their quarterback, their true freshman, for I think $12 million over the life of his deal, and I think if he plays well, he's probably going to want some more. So it's one of those things where it's really going to be hard because, again, this is to some extent, again, not completely. It is not a hard salary cap. It is a soft cap. And so now for a couple of years now, we had seen salaries rise and rise and rise and very, very quickly. And now things are capped. How is that going to affect some of these teams? Because you can't just say, okay, well, he wants more. Well, let's give him more because otherwise we lose him and we can't have that. Well, if he gets more, someone else is going to have to take a pay cut somewhere, right? So it's one of those, how are you going to balance that? I think that you are going to have to become much more the general manager position in college football, especially, is going to take on even more of an outsized role than it already has, as someone who can just has to help a coach juggle this, right? Not as like a professional general manager where they're above the coach and they can fire the coach, but more just as someone who is able to help the coach juggle the salary cap and juggle who gets what and when and why. I think that's going to be really important to have that squared away.
Or is there going to be somebody in each athletic department that is quote unquote the GM when it comes to dividing out this money and therefore being over each, team to determine what that looks like? See, I think that's even more intriguing, because if you got somebody that's over football and telling them what they can or can't do with this money, which is possible, it'll be an interesting dynamic with that one. We knew about the smaller shares and how that may all play out in that factor. Brian Seeley, Major League Baseball, odd choice to lead the new College Sports Commission that has been created within 2 or 3 hours of this being notified of going forward. What do you know about Brian Seeley? I know he was famous for some Major League Baseball investigations in the past and things like that, but kind of what's your background here with that and the College Sports Commission that was created?
Yeah, I think the number one thing to know about Brian Seeley is, again, he comes from MLB, as you said. He worked at MLB with Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner. I think that is the number one thing to know. I assume that will be a significant part. That is a significant part of the reason he is now in this job, particularly. And I think that is a kind of a reflection of where this is going. Right, this is going to be a power conference friendly guy, a power conference friendly college sports commission. I think they are not going to have a ton of warm fuzzies for the smaller schools. Would be my guess. They are not going to play fair. They are going to be biased toward the bigger schools because the bigger schools bring in more money. Would be my guess. So we'll see. That it remains to be seen, but that would be my guess out of this. As far as the College Sports Commission goes, I think it's important to note here. They were created by the power conferences. They are going to oversee the NIL deals, as it says here on the screen. NIL deals, anything over $600 in NIL. Now, this is not what the schools are paying. This is true NIL, where you're getting money from Gatorade or Nike or the Pizza X, right? Something in your college town.
Hoosier Connect as it pertains to Indiana.
Exactly, right. So you are being paid for your likeness by someone, not for playing for this team, but because they want you to advertise their product, right? And so if the deal is over $600, you have to submit it to this College Sports Commission, and they are going to investigate whether that is a true market value for your deal, right? You can't, like, Pizza X cannot just be giving you $1 million for no reason, because IU would like you to have some more money, and it can't come from the school, right? So that is what this College Sports Commission is going to be in charge of, is trying to figure out fair market value for these deals and whether it matches. They have farmed that out to, as it says here, Deloitte, which is the consulting firm, and Deloitte is going to run the numbers. They're going to do their calculations. They're going to figure out, hey, does this deal make sense from a market perspective, or is it just the school trying to get around the salary cap? That is the goal here, is to really make schools stick to the salary cap. Of course, this is probably going to lead to lawsuits. We need to get that off the top first. We just did this. This is probably going to lead to lawsuits. The first time Deloitte comes back and tells the College Sports Commission, hey, that guy does not deserve that amount of money that he's getting from whatever NIL, whoever is trying to pay him, and they say we are denying this deal, they are not allowed to make that deal, that person is probably going to court. And I don't really know how we get around that. So we're going to see how that pans out, because the courts have been very, very reluctant to have any kind of restriction on the money that these kids can make. Now, the whole point of this settlement was trying to stop the tide of lawsuits. There have been so many lawsuits. The settlement was supposed to kind of be the end of that, at least for a little while. I don't know how the courts are going to to read that. If the first time one of these lawsuits is filed, they're just going to say, "Well, that's what the settlement says. That it's Deloitte's call. You have to stick with it." Or are they going to be like, "Well, this was a restraint of trade. I can't believe that this settlement was approved."
Yeah.
It is going to happen very, very quickly that happens. People are going to push the envelope, and then we're going to see. And we might be back. We might be right back here looking for another lawsuit in 4 months from now. So,
Well,
that this is where the rubber is going to meet the road here.
yeah. Well, a couple things that I've heard as it pertains to this is number one, name, image, and likeness, like you said, should be based on a kid's marketability in terms of followers and things like that. So who is going to be able to determine best on what that value is? Now, some try to link it to athletic ability. Well, the running back from school A makes this, so therefore this running back from school B should make exactly that. Well, that's not the truth in some respects. And if they go by that, you're exactly right. You're going to see some of this lawsuit stuff. The other thing I saw was the number one violator of this potential rule was the schools themselves that had collectives directly tied to the school. And so they're the ones that were breaking this rule the most, which I think goes to your comment about kind of trying to circumvent this money cap. So, things of that nature. So, it's going to be interesting. John asked 2.5 billion split 14. Yeah. Yeah. These kids are going to make a pretty good couple dollars, especially the new ones coming on board are going to make 6 figures at the least, not including NIL. I mean, how this is all broken up, and we'll talk a little bit about that too here in a second. But the Deloitte thing will be an interesting aspect. This commission. Now, the other thing too, I want to add, the NCAA has officially broken off any type of governance of the P4 schools. They no longer will serve as a legislative body for any of the P4 schools, Big Ten, SEC, when it comes to this matter with football and basketball, I believe will be a part of that aspect of it. They have essentially said, go at it, boys. You listen to what the College Sports Commission's created. And that includes anything outside of, recruiting, what is legible, what legal, what is not, some of those things. So there's a lot of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed when it comes to this as it pertains to how one can recruit, calendar, things of that nature. So it's going to be a whirlwind as we go. This is the one, whoops, sorry about that. I wanted to go back at one was the biggest one on that one was what it did not resolve was gender equity. It did not resolve what that issue is going to be. Have you heard anything on the Title IX aspects of this? Because you talk about lawsuits, that's the first avenue I think this is going to come under.
Yeah, and I mean that is a major question right now, right? Okay. The idea of Title IX is supposed to be there is equal number of resources from your school for men's and women's sports, right? That is the at least one part of Title IX, right? And right. So again, there is significant disagreement on this, and I am not a lawyer, so I'm not particularly qualified to be talking about this. But I do believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, before the Biden administration left office, a couple of weeks before, frankly, I think it was in January or late December, the Department of Education under the Biden administration released a memo basically saying that when this settlement comes through, essentially, you are going to need to pay equal revenue to men's, women's athletes in order to not fall afoul of Title IX.
Right.
The Trump administration came in, and one of the first things they did in this department was basically say, no, that's not right. You don't have to do that. So I think it's going to be a question of who is someone going to test this? I'm sure someone will. Again, this is another avenue where we are going to get more lawsuits out of this. And then what does the judge feel about what Title IX actually says? And that is going to come down to the particular judge. And it's going to come down to the particular appellate judge. And there's a decent chance something like that gets to the Supreme Court. And we're going to find out what the Supreme Court thinks of that, because it's supposed to be equal resources from the schools, does that mean that they have to pay these kids equal amount of money? I don't know, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the case law in that. And again, I am not a lawyer, so it's hard for me to say. But it is an open question, and is going to come down to which judge gets that case, because there will be, I'm almost certain, a case, and that is a huge amount of money. Because again, obviously, as you said, we're operating under 75 to 85% of this is going to football and men's basketball. Well, that could change if this gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court says no, actually it has to be equal. I don't expect that to happen, but it is a possibility.
Well, here's the one thing that has plagued Title IX for years, and it's lumping in football. Football is a different beast. It has over 100 participants. Okay, over 100. Basketball, women's and men's basketball are more in that equitable range of, 13, 14 player, 15 player rosters. There's where you could see it potentially of that, what you're saying in terms of the equal pay for the top spots, but they all want to loop football in it because it's the betterment for the lady sports out there, because it has the most numbers in it and therefore the most dollars. And therefore that's where you get the bigger piece of the pie. So it's a potential interesting segment that could happen with Title IX if it ever gets there. I don't think it's going to happen early. Maybe it will. We'll have to wait, for a season or two to see where it all shakes out with all that. One thing I didn't want to skip over before we move on to this other aspect of it, the roster sizes. The one thing, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, roster sizes in football were to be capped at 105. What they've come up in, and this is what we've been held up on for the last month and a half, was roster sizes. My understanding of the settlement now is you can, if you want to, basically grandfather in this class of 2025, but as each class goes out, that number decreases. So if you have, but the biggest thing is adding 20 more players to a roster is a costly measure when you think about it. So not everybody will take advantage of that because of that reasoning. But I guess my understanding is if you had the additional 20 players, they can be brought back for this year. But then as each class phases out, the number will eventually get down to 105 as a hard ceiling within the next 4 to 5 years. Is that kind of how you see it, or no?
That is my understanding. It basically there were a lot of negotiations that went around this. The NCAA wanted to go down to 105 for football, as an example, 105 right away. Claudia Wilkin, the judge, and the plaintiffs basically said that's too soon. You need to grandfather some people in. And the NCAA's response was, well, we won't grandfather them in en masse, but we will allow schools to do it if they would like to. And so the way this is going to work is schools have to say, as of, I think it's before the season starts, essentially, they have to tell the NCAA, or the College Sports Commission, I should say, these are, quote unquote, our designated players. That's what they're calling them. Is basically These are the people that are going to be on our roster that are more than 105 on our roster. This is who would be that we would have cut, but we get to keep them now. And that is you have to submit that list to the NCAA, and then those people get to be on the roster. But when they leave, you're not allowed to replace them, I think is the idea. That seems to me to be the idea. And so again, as you said, all of these people will wash out in 4 years, and then we'll have 105 cap, right?
Yeah, because a kid could come in with this group and get through 2 days and say, I'm quitting. They can't replace that individual or individuals, number one. Number two, my understanding as well is anything above 105, they don't have to guarantee a full scholarship either. It doesn't have to be in the means of a full grant and aid.
This is how we keep walk-ons for the next 4 years, basically.
Yes, right. Anybody that's in the 105, they get full boat on top of whatever they're going to get from the salary aspect of it all in NIL. So that one too is a little bit, there's a lot of uncertainty there as in how it came out, but I think that was a pretty good cleanup of kind of what we were looking for there. We talked about this earlier, did this a little bit of the quarterback's payday, the revenue sharing era, and how much quarterbacks will make. We talked about the 20.5 and the increase starting July 1. I'm trying to get to the meat of this. There's kind of a breakdown of estimated each football program, if they went to the full amount, would get between 15 and 17.5 million annually for their football programs. That's not including NIL. That's just the revenue aspect of it. And then it talked about them earning low seven figures. So many are expected to earn between $750K to $1.5 million annually, with the star quarterbacks exceeding $2 million with added NIL deals. You pointed out Carson Beck, who is, like you said, scheduled to make $4 million. Now, one thing I think we all assume this is cash, hard cash. It's not.
It's not.
It could be real estate. It could be automobiles. It could be, whatever. Like I said, real estate being a home or something like that. That's the way I understand it and the value aspect of it. So if you're going to pay let's just use Mendoza as an example. Fernando is probably going to make, in essence, probably $1 million to $1.5 million next year as the Indiana starting quarterback. Is that a fair assessment or not?
That would be my guess. I don't know. I don't have any hard evidence on those figures, but in terms of market value, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, right. But the backup quarterback, what do you pay the backup? And then what do you pay the backup's backup? Because you get into the quarterback room, you got to have at least 3 that can play, and you need 4 total in order to get through a year, in theory. So what does a salary of a Jacob Bell, a first-year redshirt potential QB, get to come to IU from this deal, do you think? Just, in guessing.
Yeah. That's a great.
Are you going to do it by class? Are you going to segment it out by class? Or is it going to be segmented, by player? Because it's so, I don't know how you go about doing that. Do you? I mean, it's mind blowing to me.
Yeah, my guess is if I were Kurt Signetti and I had to go about doing this, what I would probably do is I would make it based on what kind of production you've had in the past, and then first of all, do a base salary, so maybe 25 to 50,000 for each player on top of their scholarship. And then on top of that, what kind of production have you had in the past, and pay off of production, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the way that I would probably conceptualize doing it. Maybe I'm sure there are people who work in IU's football program who are going over scads and oodles of numbers trying to figure out the best way to apportion this, but that would be kind of what I would do if I were them. Maybe they have a different route going about it, but especially when you're Indiana and you don't have like 5-star recruits coming in, right? Like 5-star recruits at a high school are going to be pretty expensive. I think a lot of teams are probably not going to want to pay those guys that have never produced in college before,
right? And
are going to be pretty expensive, and you're taking away from your roster. So, and if they don't produce right away, that's stuff that you are not getting on the field. That is basically wasted money for that 1 year. Not to say that person is a waste, but you are wasting the money because they aren't playing for you, and you don't know because they're a freshman. No matter how talented they are, they're still going to be a freshman. So I'm interested to see what the market looks like for the top level high school recruits, because that's who's going to get squeezed here, I would guess.
Well, and I look at it from the other side of the equation. No longer is all the 5-stars going to go to Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, all these other schools, because they're not going to be able to pay them all.
Yes.
Like you said.
We've already seen a little bit of that. Alabama and Georgia are nowhere near as talented as they were 10 years ago. And now that's just going to be, it's going to accelerate. You're not going to be able to keep these guys around, 5-stars sitting on your bench, because they can get paid elsewhere. Right. And so it's going to flatten things out at least a little bit. to some extent, and some of these guys are going to go elsewhere.
That's what I think it may be for the betterment of that, an Indiana per se, having opportunities to get a highly touted 5-star recruit type in their program, because they're not going to be able to go to every institution out there. The other thing being the potential that an ACC school or a Big 12 school who doesn't go up to the full amount, they can miss out on a lot of recruits because of money. And a school like in Indiana and some of these other schools may be a benefactor because of it. So that's the thing, like I said, like you just said, how you slot it. How do you slot it with that? And then the NIL aspect of it, the school is supposed to have no say in that. That is all outside arrangement, which I thought was interesting, is like, well, how can you stay on the same level as one another if the coach is paying them X and you want to pay them Y, but that goes well beyond where we can go?
I think that's the idea, right? Like, the idea is that we are setting, quote unquote, a soft salary cap, and then everything beyond that is market value. It's supposed to be like, you are supposed to, the $20.5 million is supposed to be the vast majority of this. And the NIL is basically just supposed to be for guys who are already established with brands outside of football, where Gatorade is coming to them. The school is not supposed to help with that. Right.
Well, and that's where with some of these 5-star so-called kids that are coming out of different regions, they may be able to have deals in place that ultimately help a school without having to pay them up front too much as well. Yeah. So it's because you got to feel like they're going to kind of do what the NFL does. They're going to slot quarterbacks and linemen and receivers and D linemen. I mean, what these levels are going to be attained as it pertains to value. And while we don't have a draft, that's kind of what recruiting is all going to go by, is what you have to go out and get at a certain position. And that will all drive a recruiting year, is based upon that amount. Now the question is, we as the general public probably will never know that amount of what a school has or doesn't have. And that's the other thing that I think, do you think we'll have transparency in the numbers?
My guess is no. Now, theoretically, unlike the NFL, unlike other sports leagues, those numbers should be available via FOIA. Those should be
that's what I mean.
Available numbers, theoretically. I bet there is going to be a court case over that as well, and I don't really expect it to come down in favor of people knowing. I bet there is going to be a court that finds that there is some level of privacy where students are not made, or student athletes are not made to have their salaries disclosed. Now, coaches' salaries are disclosed, and theoretically it should be relatively similar. But the idea could be, well, these are students and not employees, because again, we're talking here, these are still not employees. They've been very clear that this settlement does not mean the students are employees. So my guess is that, again, I am not a lawyer, but my guess is that there is going to be a court somewhere that says, no, even though theoretically this would be publicly available information, there is going to be a court that says no. And that's disappointing for people who work in the media like us, who would like to know and who would like to keep people informed. And we're going to try. Let's be clear. There will be FOIA requests filed almost immediately. July 1st, there is going to be a flood of them. And so it'll be interesting to see the result of that. And maybe some will be disclosed. But my guess is we end up getting a lawsuit around that as well.
Well, and
so
here's the thing.
Plenty of litigation to come out.
Yeah, right. And kind of the things that I have up here: players remain non-employees. Payments are restructured like revenue distributions, and legal questions, like you said, will center around employment. Are they employees? Now, one thing that has been going on here the last month, and this kind of leads into Kentucky by all schools, as their entire athletic department has broken away from the school. They are now under Kentucky Wildcats LLC. So they're associated with the school, but they're not associated with the school, because they're going to be their own company that has athletics under the banner of Kentucky Wildcats, which I thought was pretty smart, because it removes all liability in theory away from the institution. Are we going to see that become a more frequent model as we move forward here? Because of some of these things, like you said, of general equity lawsuits and things that get tied back to the institution. Is that an avenue for these schools to go? Like, we're just going to become our own LLC. It opens up a lot different avenues for us and things of that nature. And then we can then they may treat them like employees.
My guess is yes. I think that Kentucky was a pioneer in that space. I think there's going to be other schools that do that for exactly what you said, for liability reasons, right? Now, it's going to be a question of, is that enough to shield the institution? They're going to try, right? That is the strategy that I think a lot of schools are going to land on, is let's spin off the athletic department away from the school and try to make it its own entity. And again, that goes back to FOIA, right? If you are someone who lives in Kentucky, can you FOIA that LLC basically and get information on salaries? Probably not, would be my guess. So that is just a very small part of the difference between a private business and a public university. So I do think that is going to be something that a lot of schools end up doing, and we'll have to see whether that is something that courts allow to stand as protecting them from liability. Because again, not a lawyer. But I think.
But you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
I did, absolutely. But it is going to be another question for courts to sort out here. And I do think that, again, we keep coming back to this. This settlement is not the end of litigation. There is going to be a lot of litigation on different questions going forward, on different avenues of different things. And there are going to be lawsuits, and courts are going to have to figure out the answers to these things. And part of that is because there's almost no chance we get, there's very little chance that we get any kind of bill from Congress addressing any of this stuff. We've been talking about that for 3 years now, that the NCAA really wants a bill out of Congress to enshrine some of this stuff in law. And basically there has been no agreement in Congress. There's been very little traction. It seems there's some work that's been done on it, but there hasn't been any kind of major push for it. And there's so much else going on right now that I don't know whether that is realistic to expect. And so all of this is going to have to be done through the court system. And that takes time, and it takes uncertainty along the way. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. This is not the end of the journey of reshaping college sports. It's barely the beginning, frankly.
Yeah, right. And the fact that I'm sure there'll be a commission involved at some point in time, as they kind of backpedaled on that, as they were going to have one. And now it seems as if they were talked out of that avenue, which I think is good for right now, because they got to let the dust settle with this and allow it to take hold and deal with what comes along, rather than trying to tweak it so much that it ends up just sending chaos into the throes of the NCAA and all these schools. So at least we've got a parameter to work with now. Is it the best thing? No. There still has to be guardrails. There still has to be rules and things of that nature. But we are where we're at, and it's now finalized, and schools can move forward with the implementation and how this is going to look. And like I said, it's not going to be the same for everyone. There's going to be differences between conferences to conferences and schools to schools when it all says and done. I mean, like the Mid-American Conference, they're not going to fully participate in this. They'll participate in some ways, but not the full throated 20 million. So, hey, man, I appreciate you jumping in on here. Short notice, Sunday evening, all that good stuff. And hey, stick to Dylan's writing at the Journal Gazette. I'm sure he'll have some things on this as the week progresses, as we move through the months of June and July. But my appreciation for you taking time on a busy Sunday to jump on here and talk about this for a little bit, Dylan.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And this was fun. It was informative for me, as it was hopefully for everyone else.
Well, they sometimes say I have a little bit of smarts, but not always. You never know. Too many hits in the head. Dylan Sinn from the Journal Gazette up here in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area. Appreciate him joining. We'll catch you again another time, buddy.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Appreciate Dylan Sinn for coming on here this evening on a I don't want to call it an emergency broadcast, but I guess you can call it an additional broadcast of the Hoosier football tailgate here on the Hoosier.com, and stick to the Hoosier.com as well as on 3, as we will have more and more about this as time permits and goes onward. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions that will need to be answered before everything hits July 1. And I'm going to guarantee you that the Hoosier.com staff will have those answers as ready and available as soon as they can get them out to the readers as well as here on the Hoosier tailgate. And don't forget, our buddy Jimmy Coyle will have this and other things throughout the week at Indiana Sports Beat Radio as well. But for now, thanks again for joining me here this Sunday evening. Have a safe and prosperous work week. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on the Hoosier.com, powered by On3.